What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to my Week 13 takeaway video. Ladies and gentlemen, Week 13 is going to be up there for the most chaotic week of the college football season. A ton of upsets, a ton of chaos, and could it lead to even more chaos as we get down the line, as we get closer and closer to the college football playoff? Well, I'm going to tell you everything that I learned from Week 13, everything that I took away. Maybe you already took these things away, maybe you didn't, but this is what I learned from this past week of college football action. Thank you all for sticking with me throughout the weird technology things I have going on. If you like what you see and you want to see more of it, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You especially should if you're as big of a college football nerd as I am, because this week and next week, I'm going to try to put out a ton of videos up on my channel, at least as much as I can with everything I got going on. But again, if you enjoy this content, support the channel any way you can. If you just want to sit down, relax, and watch this video and any of my other videos, well, I'd greatly appreciate that. But you can also like, you can comment, you can share, and anything else you do is helping me to support the channel. And I really do appreciate everything you guys do, as well as go and giving me a follow on Twitter, X, Instagram, at TailgateNate29. Any other way you follow me helps support what I do outside of YouTube as a sports media student. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you my Week 13 takeaways and the biggest things that I learned from this past week of college football action. Let's start out with this takeaway right here. There were a lot of top contenders that survived this past week. And again, you hear me talk about the survive and advance mentality a lot, right? That's kind of the thing that I've talked about most often throughout this college football season, especially throughout this month of November. And it really is just the most important thing. If you don't win, then you cannot advance further. Your hopes of getting into a college football playoff spot are ruined. And I'm sure I don't need to explain that to all you fine people, but we did have a lot of top contenders go on the road or play at home and survive. But these two, most notably on the road. And actually, they're the only two I'm going to be talking about on the road, because everyone else pretty much took care of business, did what they were supposed to do. These two teams kind of had to fight. Boise State in another battle this year. They have had some tough opponents throughout this season. San Jose State gave them a little bit of a challenge. Nevada gave them a little bit of a challenge. UNLV probably their biggest challenge. And of course, that road game against Oregon, which they inevitably ended up losing. Washington State gave them a challenge for a little bit. Even Georgia Southern back in week 1 of the college football season. They're going to get Oregon State coming up this week, but this weekend against Wyoming, or I should say this upcoming week, but this past weekend against Wyoming, I mean, it just was not a great offensive performance all around. Maddox Madsen didn't really have his best stuff. In this Wyoming defense, man, they had high expectations coming into the year. They had not really met them up to this point. And that was a Wyoming defense that absolutely stood on its head. Only allowed Boise State 352 yards, and the offense was able to move fairly well. But again, the backs of Ashton Jeanty and his legs, that is what helped Boise State lead to the win. And then a phenomenal game in Minneapolis, because Penn State, boy, they were on the ropes. And this college football playoff conversation was about to get a whole lot more interesting if Penn State were to lose this game. But Tyler Warren coming up huge. Penn State did not put their best foot forward. Again, that run game, they just have to be able to get things figured out in that run game. Nick Singleton, Katron Allen. Nick Singleton had himself a pretty okay day, but Katron Allen, 7 carries for 10 yards. Penn State's got to be able to get things figured out in that run game. Drew Aller, though, had himself a pretty good day, and they found Tyler Warren early and often, especially late as well. He helped them seal that game, but Penn State has got a lot of issues. The defense did okay. They did a fairly fine job. They did force a couple turnovers, but Minnesota was able to keep it close. Penn State couldn't get anything going on third down. Minnesota was 5 for 12. That was almost the big difference there in that game, but Penn State was able to survive late. So both of these contenders still firmly in college football playoff spot. Penn State, as long as they're able to win next week, I believe it's against, they play Maryland. I'll actually fact check that right now. And Boise State next week, I've already mentioned they go play Oregon State. Yes, Penn State does play Maryland. I mean, both of them probably get into the college football playoff. Boise State might need to win their conference as well. But, I mean, Penn State, as long as they take care of business next week, I think they're going to be in that field of 12 no matter what. And Boise State, again, another tough test, but they are able to survive it. But surviving and advancing doesn't always work. It doesn't always happen. And when teams don't survive and they don't advance, well, it leads to a lot of chaos, more specifically, especially this week within the SEC. There, again, was a lot of other chaotic games and things that happened, but everyone else pretty much was able to survive, and we'll talk about the Big 12 later, but I want to talk about the SEC right now because, I mean, you thought the SEC race couldn't get any more interesting. It actually has simplified quite a bit from the crazy 8-way, 7-way, 6-way tiebreaker that we all thought was possible, now no longer is. And, well, this week knocked out a ton of teams and might have ruined the college football playoff hopes of a couple of them. Let's start with the game that happened earliest in the day. It's going to be the one that is to the leftmost side of your screen there, and it's the Florida Gators and the Ole Miss Rebels. I mean, Ole Miss, Jackson Dart, what are we doing, dude? I mean, 2 interceptions down the line, especially that one into triple coverage. There was absolutely no shot that football was going to get to his receiver at all. I mean, there were 3 Florida Gators in the air. I don't know what Jackson Dart was thinking throwing that football. He started out really well and then just kind of went cold, and the rest of this offense couldn't pick up the slack. Florida's defense able to force again those 2 interceptions late, as well as a fumble earlier in the game. As Florida, I mean, they're just, again, playing the role of spoiler within the SEC. They beat LSU last week. They beat Ole Miss this week. Florida is now bowl eligible, man. I think Billy Napier's job is going to be saved. That's a story for another video, but Florida, man, they're really starting to spoil things. How about Oklahoma spoiling things of the Alabama Crimson Tide? A lot of people thought, hey, I mean, Auburn, Oklahoma and Auburn, 2 very winnable games for Bama. This should be a team that should make the SEC championship game with all the tiebreaker things. And now Alabama, I believe, is eliminated from SEC championship contention, and it's their 3rd loss of the season, much like Ole Miss. It's going to be really interesting to see where the committee ranks those 2 teams. I'm talking about Ole Miss, I'm talking about Bama, because Alabama just had nothing working. I mean, 3 interceptions from Jalen Milroe. He looked awful. The run game looked awful. The defense, I mean, the defense held its own. It didn't really allow Oklahoma to do much through the air, but the run defense was awful for Alabama yesterday. The 3rd down defense, awful. And Oklahoma was also really able to dominate time of possession there as well, having the ball for, I believe, almost 10 more minutes than what Alabama did in that game. And it was thanks to those 3 picks that Jalen Milroe threw. I believe at least one of them returned to the house for a touchdown. Oklahoma is also one of those teams that makes a bowl game. They're a team that has probably underperformed to a lot of people this season, and they were able to pull that one off. And then you had the thrilling game in Auburn, Alabama. It went into 4 overtimes. That's the 2nd set of 2-point conversion tries. Auburn, and a phenomenal catch by Keandre Lambert-Smith, the aftermath of which you see there, of Keandre Lambert-Smith falling to the ground. And then Texas Tech had their game-tying 2-point conversion try dropped in the end zone. And Auburn, I mean, Auburn has really struggled with field goals this year, and it was field goals that allowed Auburn to tie the game, to take the lead, and really to help get the game as far as it did, and for Auburn to inevitably win. Now, if they want to get bowl eligible, they're going to have to win next week against Alabama, but I mean, if you see what Oklahoma just did, Auburn can absolutely go on the road in Tuscaloosa and win that game. I believe it's in Tuscaloosa at least. I will fact check that. It is going to be in Tuscaloosa next week, but I mean, man, Auburn also played really well in that game. Before the season, Peyton Thorne, he was, again, not up to his standard, and, well, not up to the Auburn standard. They need to find that pass game. Peyton Thorne's been able to provide that. Jarquez Hunter is an absolute dog in the running back room. He is really, really good. The addition of Keandre Lambert-Smith proved to be huge. Cam Coleman was huge in this game for Auburn, but what it does now for Texas A&M is, well, you take a look at it right here. The winner of Texas and Texas A&M, a takeaway that I think I had all the way back in October, maybe even September. No, not September, October for sure. Texas and Texas A&M is going to be an SEC championship play-in game. The winner of that game next week in College Station will go on to play Georgia in the SEC championship. Now, I'm going to release a video tomorrow talking about clinching scenarios and all of this other stuff going on within college football right now, and how different teams can make the conference championship games and things like that. But chaos within the SEC, this is probably the most chaotic year that SEC football has ever had. We have seen so many upsets. There is no one true pride and true elite team within the SEC this year. And, well, the second or I should say the latter picture of the conference championship game is going to get figured out next week in College Station. Let's go ahead and move on here. I told you we would talk about the Big 12. Let's talk about it now. In case you have forgotten about it, I know there's been a lot of chaos with the SEC, and I think that's what a lot of people have focused on this year, especially how if it affects the college football playoff race. Well, the Big 12 chaos still exists, and it's affecting their own college football playoff race. I talked earlier about how Florida was a team in the SEC playing spoiler. You want to talk about a team playing spoiler? Kansas is the first ever team with a losing record to beat 3 straight ranked opponents. They beat Iowa State, they beat BYU, and this week, I'm just going to go ahead and say what everyone out there is thinking. They handled the Colorado Buffaloes with ease. That Buffalo defense couldn't stop a nosebleed, and more specifically, they just could not stop Devin Neal. He had over 200 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns on the day. He was also the team's leading receiver. He almost had 300 yards of total offense in this game, and I'm not sure of any return yards or anything like that he had. So if he had any of those, which I'm looking now, he didn't. So close to 300 yards of total offense for Devin Neal. Couldn't slow him down at all. Jalen Daniels did enough to help out his team. This Kansas defense did force a couple of big stops, especially at the beginning, but the thing that did Colorado in is the Kansas defense is not all that great, but the Colorado defense did them in. Yes, 40 minutes. That's how long Kansas had the football for in this game. 40 minutes. Colorado was penalized 8 times in this game here as well. Shedeur Sanders was fine. We know Colorado doesn't have their, or I should say, one of the better run games in college football. Shedeur Sanders, he was fine. He, again, 23 of 29, 266 yards, 3 touchdowns. Travis Hunter was doing his thing. But how about the Kansas Jayhawks, ladies and gentlemen, causing some chaos within the Big 12, and then Arizona State doing what I thought they were going to do. Again, I thought there would be a BYU loss eventually. I didn't think it'd be last week to Kansas, but that did happen. I always did think Arizona State was going to beat BYU. They had the whole fiasco with the fans rushing the field, and a second was put back on the clock, and all of that stuff happened, yes. But at the end of the day, Arizona State, the Hail Mary pass was caught, but the Sun Devils were able to get the ball carrier down at around the 3-yard line. And I mean, you have to give credit where credit is due. BYU, one of the teams that were projected to finish towards the bottom of the Big 12 conference, and what they have done this year has been amazing. But how about Arizona State, man? Everybody, including myself, I'm included in this conversation, picked Arizona State to be last in the Big 12 conference. A lot of people had them sitting at the very clear bottom. I am one of those people. I'm sorry, Sun Devil fans. This is a team that has performed phenomenally this season, and the job that Kenny Dillingham has done has been extraordinary. Cam Scadaboo is a really, really good running back. He averaged over 5 yards per carry. In this contest, BYU could not slow him down. Sam Leavitt, while he may not be the greatest quarterback, he did enough to really help his team win. Jordan Tyson, that wide receiver, I mean, let's talk about how good he is. He played really, really well. Third downs were favorable for both of these teams, but 2 turnovers to 1. BYU lost the turnover battle. They also lost the time of possession battle by over 10 minutes. That is what helped the Sun Devils win that game. And if you want to talk about who's going to make the Big 12 championship game, again, I'm not going to get too much into that here, but there's a lot that can happen in the Big 12 championship picture. And if all of BYU, Arizona State, Colorado, and Iowa State lose this next week, you could even see some of those 3-loss teams come into that picture. It gets really complicated. We're going to dive on into it in a video that I will be releasing tomorrow. But now let's go ahead and move on, because guys, my number 2 takeaway is this is, again, the rankings from the past week that the college football playoff selection mini put out. So, again, this is not the updated AP poll. This is not my poll. Again, this is the college football playoff rankings. You actually even see it down there on that little picture. That's when the rankings came out. I think the college football playoff field is about to break wide open. Now, I know the field of 12 might be pretty easy to figure out up to this point. I mean, Ohio State, Oregon are going to stay number 1 and number 2. Talk about the Buckeyes here in just a little bit. As you see, this is only takeaway number 2. We still got one left. Texas, as long as they take care of business, they should be in. But with the losses of Alabama and Ole Miss especially, what do you do with them? Are they still going to be in the college football playoff field? You'd think now Tennessee is going to jump into the field. Maybe you elevate the SMU Mustangs. What do you do with a team now like the Clemson Tigers, the South Carolina Gamecocks? Can the American Athletic Champion start now getting into this picture. I think it's going to be very fascinating to see what the committee does on Tuesday, and then I'll have to show you guys what I think will happen down the stretch as we project outwards on my college football playoff predictions on Wednesday. But I mean, right now, the Big Ten is looking good. I think Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Indiana all put themselves in great positions to be in the SEC with all the chaos that has happened there. I mean, Alabama and Ole Miss might very well both be missing out on a college football playoff spot. And I think the conversation will become a lot more interesting if Vanderbilt is able to beat Tennessee this upcoming week. Do I think it's going to happen? No. But I also didn't think that Oklahoma was going to beat Bama. And I also didn't think that Florida was going to pull off a second straight upset and beat Ole Miss. Hell, I didn't even think that Kansas was going to beat the Colorado Buffaloes. This really is a season where anything can happen. And you can project outwards, you can predict all you want, but this college football season will have you shaking your head and having your predictions be proven wrong, just like that. That was a very bad snap, but you guys get what I'm trying to say. There's still going to be more chaos in the college football season, and that's why I think this playoff field is about to break wide open, because you have to consider, I mean, what if Tennessee does lose that game? What if now can the ACC get 3 teams in? Now, if Tennessee loses that game and maybe even Georgia makes the SEC championship game, which they're already in, and then they lose, well, they're a 3-loss team. Do you keep Georgia out now? And at this point, I mean, we were talking, what was it, a couple weeks ago about what do you do with all these 2-loss SEC teams. Now you're talking about what do you do with all these 3-loss SEC teams, because if you project outwards and Texas beats Texas A&M, well, that gives them their 4th loss. They're probably out. And then Texas wins the SEC championship over Georgia. What does that do? Especially then if Vandy were to beat Tennessee, you got Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, all sitting there with 3 losses. Does the SEC only get 1 team in? I would find that hard to be true, but then you throw South Carolina into that mix of 3-loss teams as well. If they are able to beat Clemson this past week, I think that's going to be a very important game for college football playoff hopes. That will have a preview prediction video out on my channel. But again, does the American Athletic Champion now have a say in this whole thing? I just can't wait to see the conversation. If there's more chaos to come in the following week, I can't wait to talk about it. This college football playoff field, I have a pretty good feeling. Yes, the field of 12 can be pretty easy to see right now, but I think it's about to break wide open depending on what the committee does on Tuesday. And I'm not going to talk about this one for very long, because I do think there were quite a few people expecting this to be the case, but I also saw a lot of people picking Indiana, and especially a lot of the people on game day and a lot of the other people that do some really good work here on this platform talking about college football, picking Indiana to beat Ohio State. It was because of the issues on the offensive line, because of what Indiana has shown through 10 weeks. And sorry, Cinderella, the slipper just didn't fit. And that was pretty clear. I think even though the score was 14-7 at halftime, I think that was pretty clear to see throughout the first half, because, I mean, Joel Klatt said it best, and I hate to steal his quote, but I'm going to. At halftime or leading up into the third quarter action, he said both teams felt like they left meat on the bone in that first half, and they definitely did. Ohio State felt like they should have been up 21 to, or I say at least 21, if not 28-7, because of the missed red zone opportunities. And Indiana's thinking, well, if we don't have all these special teams errors, I mean, this game is a whole lot closer. Maybe we even have the lead going into the locker room in Columbus, and I think that would have done well for the Indiana Hoosiers. But you heard Curt Cignetti say it after that game. Indiana did not handle the volume well. They didn't handle the environment well. They had to go to a silent snap count, and you could see how clearly that affected them in that game. Indiana did not play their best football. Indiana, I still think, is a top 12 team. I don't think going on the road and losing to what eventually could be the College Football Playoff Committee's #1 overall seed, if they happen to beat Michigan and then they win the rematch with Oregon in the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis. Strength of schedule, is it going to hurt Indiana in overall seeding? Yeah, and honestly, as it should. I mean, it's no fault of their own. You have to play the schedule that you played, but you also have to reward teams that have better wins than Indiana. And up to this point, their best win still is Washington, Michigan, Nebraska, couple of bowl eligible teams there that they have beat. But they went on the road and they got silenced in Columbus, only 151 yards of total offense. This Buckeye defense was amazing this entire day. Caleb Downs was amazing, even returned a punt for a touchdown. Will Howard, man, is not getting talked about enough for a Heisman contention. And do I think he'll win it? No. Do I think he'll get into New York? I think maybe there's a chance he could, but he's got very comparable numbers to Dylan Gabriel, someone that is being talked highly about for the Heisman Trophy. The way he's put this team on his back has been very, very impressive to watch. And even with all the offensive line issues, which has been Ohio State's biggest doubt this year, didn't really seem to be a problem against the Indiana Hoosiers. Sure, there were a couple things here and there, and I mean, you're putting forth a new starting offensive lineman. There are going to be things to iron out, but it performed really well. The Buckeye defensive front performed really well. I think they got 5 or 6 sacks in that game. They handle the Indiana Hoosiers. They win their second top 5 matchups. Ohio State, man, might very well prove to be the best team in the country, and we'll see if that's the case if them and the Ducks happen to rematch in the Big Ten championship game, because Ohio State has got the game to worry about this week. That is going to do it for my weekly takeaway video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked the video, well, show that and show your support for the channel. Do anything you can to support the channel. Remember to play hard, but tailgate harder. I'll talk to all of you guys tomorrow. You'll get my top 25 and another video as well, where I will go through clinching scenarios for every contending team to get into their conference championship game. Goodbye.